Okay, we're back in business with a new topic. Scratch drawing completely. Although that example is worth looking at, I will tell you it's definitely cool. For those of you guys who have it running on your systems right now, it's cool. I wish I could show it to you. Not happening on my computer. Sometimes computers don't like examples. It even happens with me. So now I feel you. For those people who have problems running stuff, I totally feel you right now. So that's what happens. So let's go on to another topic. It's called widgets, and widgets you actually have to do in one of your assignments, which is why I sort of wanted to cover this one as well. I'm going to fly through it because we've seen some of these concepts already. We're just putting the big pictures together to kind of conclude the graphic part of today, and then we'll go on to a few more things. We still got some time left. It's only 3 o'clock. So. Buttons, image buttons, radio buttons, checkbox buttons. We've seen the listeners, we've seen the components. Let's put them together in a cool example that I'm going to show to you that's going to be kind of a comprehensive kind of a combination of all those things put together. So the choices of screens for various different widget topics, other screens corresponding to separate lectures and things of that nature you can put together. Separate layout files, separate Java classes, sharing strings between files and examples is probably a good thing to kind of take away from this. In terms of the separate layout files for each activity, this particular project, if you load it up, it's the one that's called Widgets, and it does load and it does run, so I can be able to demonstrate this to you. In the source code directory, we have buttons, spinner, and widget initialized activity. So we have 2 buttons that are going to appear, and if we load the application, I believe, oops, I thought I had it loaded. Let's load this thing up here. And I like this application because it kind of puts everything into perspective in terms of the best practices of creating an application. Now keep in mind that this is going to, well, yeah, this is a vertical and a horizontal orientation. So we're going to see things move on its side in a few minutes, but what I wanted to show you is the abstraction here. So this is the widget initial activity that comes up, and we have 2 buttons that we're going to switch between them. We have the button activity and the spinner activity, show spinners, show buttons. And the app does nothing more than, and I'll show it to you now actually, show the button like widgets. This is where I say you kind of turn your head sideways here. We got high and buy. The buy button was clicked. The high button was clicked. We've got buttons, image views. We've got radio buttons that are working together. We've got text buttons here, and then we've got on and off buttons, switch buttons. They're going to toggle. So we have a toggle button on, toggle button off. We've got basic toast messages are kind of come up when we hit the widget items. Now if I exit out here, you're going to see something actually kind of interesting, and I wanted to sort of demonstrate this to you. This is a different XML file. If I press escape to go back to the main menu, I see that I've got my app loaded this way again because it took the orientation from the original. But when I originally loaded this app, it was in a horizontal because the main activity didn't specify the orientation. I'm in horizontal mode. The other apps are specifying vertical. Once it's set the vertical mode, it's using that as a default because the main one didn't specify it. So now when I press escape, it's kind of interesting to notice it does come back this way. If I click on the show the spinners, I've got 2 spinners here, Acer and Palm for vendors here. If I click on there, I can click, trying to navigate with my mouse here, and there's Apple selected. It's just 2 spinners. So it doesn't really matter if you turn your head sideways, you can see it, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a bunch of spinners. It's probably the simplest example I've shown you today so far. So what we're looking at then is the composition of this in terms of its composure, which is the interesting thing to look at. So we have separate layout files for each one of the activities. So each one of those buttons is going to a different one, and it's actually it's designed by a different activity. So we have in here the button activity. Button activity, if I click on the file here, is going to show me the button activity that extends activity, and then I've got the spinner activity that extends activity, and then I've got my main screen. I could have called it main window, but it's the widget initial activity that comes up. The initial activity is going to have a go to activity class in here. This is the interesting part. Switches to a given class which must be a subclass of activity. So what we must do is here register the new activity in the Android manifest file. So it's kind of a different way of setting the parameter here to a class. So we're going to switch. We're using one method that says go to a different activity. So in here we're just doing the standard. The standard, here's our activity, extends activity. Set the context view to main, standard stuff. And then we have this method that we have in here. It's called go to activity. It takes an activity that extends activity, which is interesting. So this syntax is telling us that what we're looking at here is not a typecast, but an must extends. So it's an explicit extends activity. If the class doesn't extend activity, it doesn't fall into the same data type. The name of this class, of this parameter, is going to be called activity class. So this is an explicit cast to a data type of a class that extends activity, which is interesting in terms of its syntax and kind of different. And we're just going to use an intent. Don't have to go through intents. We've done it about 5 times already today or this weekend or so. So intent, new activity, intent. So it's going to load up an intent. What are we going to have here? We're going to have a show button like widgets, which is going to take a view, a clicked button that's going to come to it. That's going to run the go to activity button activity class. And then we have a show spinner. And that method is going to take a view clicked button that's going to go to activity spinner class. So it switches the spinner class when associated button is clicked. It switches to the button activity class when that button is clicked. And you're wondering, well, how does it know what button is clicked? Well, we go down to the resource file and we'll take a look at this one. In the layout folder, we have the main. And if we look at the code for main, at the XML code, we see the onClick method being used. So onClick method is being used for show spinner, onClick for show button like widgets. So we're not using any listener for this. We're just using the onClick method. We have these two methods that are designed for that. And then we have the one big one that just does nothing but load the intent. We could have taken and created the intents all over the place, like this could have had an intent, that could have had an intent, but it's a little redundant. So I like the breakout of this because it's actually loading the new, it's creating the intent and loading the new class object using using a function, using a method call. So kind of slick, it's kind of slim. And then we have here the buttons. This is the one for the buttons that we have, and the buttons is just a bunch of buttons. If you look at the GUI for it, we see that screen that has all the buttons on it. We got a button, we got an image button, we got another image button down underneath, a radio buttons, text box, checkbox button, toggle buttons. buttons. It's like a Forrest Gump with the chocolates. We got buttons everywhere. So no more buttons there. And then the spinner is again nothing more than about 2 spinners on here. That's what we saw before. 2 spinners and 2 text views. So when you click on a spinner, are we going to see a text view? Well, let's see what happens here. We don't have any click events. So what ends up happening then, if we go back to the spinner activity, we're looking at a spinner activity that extends activity, and then we're going to have a string for the item that's selected. And then on the create, let's see if I can go. Yep, I kind of did that a little bit there. I was trying to reformat my code. On the on create method, we're going to populate the spinner with the information. It looks like it's going to be in a string file that we've created for it, and then the spinner 1 is going to be a spinner, spinner 2 is going to be another spinner. We're going to put a list box of items in there. So we're just loading the spinners. We're putting an action listener set on click on item selected listener on the spinner. So you can tell that because in here we don't have any, because we have an on click and that's about it. We can't put an on click on a spinner. It's going to be an incompatible type of action that we're going to be looking at. So instead we're actually looking at the listener for this class, but we're not putting the listener out here. Instead we're putting the listener specifically on it, and then we're going to write a method down here for what happens when one's selected, and here it is here, spinner information that implements on item selected listener, which is another class that's going to run. So this is using one of the options that we did for the on-click listener where we're creating a class. And this is an inner class that has a name associated with it. Name associated is going to be spinner class. Spinner info, by the way. So spinner info is going to be mentioned up here for spinner info, because if we get on the spinner number 2, I believe we're probably setting it for spinner number 1 as well. We are setting it for spinner number 1. We have the spinner 1.set on item selected listener to a new spinner info, which is this class down here, the new spinner info. And so this is going to implement the on item selected listener. So if we say go to this, use this class, then down here on the item selected listener, it's going to check to see, is this the first one that's selected? Or if it's not, we only have 2, so it's going to be one or the other. So if an index value, and we're going to take the number that's given to us from the index of the spinner, and we're going to see what it is, and if it is, then we're going to say that the string selected is equal to the get item at position selected index, which is pretty standard code. We've seen this already, actually, in a different spinner example. There's nothing too trivial. And then this method is always empty, nothing selected. So I guess you could prompt the user, hey, select the birth date, or select something, but we're not doing it in this example. So let's see if there's anything that I missed out of the, and I just kind of wanted to quickly go through this one just to recap a little bit on putting the pieces together. And this basically models are really nice. Each activity has its own class, has its own XML interface, has its own way of interpreting the events that are occurring, and it's all handled within each one of their respective classes. And then the orientation and layout, I forgot to show you that one, but that's where we're getting the interesting behavior that occurs, is because up here, if we look at the XML interfaces, for the main, we have orientation, it's set to vertical, which we'll hit actually, but then when we look at the buttons, we're also going to set the orientation to vertical here as well. Orientation to vertical. I'm running it on a horizontal device, which is why it's stuck on vertical. It's going to show me in vertical. If it happens to be on my emulator, what am I going to turn my computer around to see it perhaps? But eventually it's going to be looking up like that on my device. I'll have to turn my device around to see it. So that's one of the things. It's when you set the orientation, it's one of the things that you have to think about in terms of your application design. But overall, that is the widget project that we're looking at. And I meant to cover this when I covered the other items in terms of the event-driven programming and the events that we did, but I kind of skipped it, so I wanted to make sure I showed at least to the example for you. So if you look through the rest of this, it's going to go through the buttons and stuff, and I won't bore you with that. I'll leave it for you for extra reading if you're still having problems creating widgets and using the concept. Then here's the image button, which was single images. This is kind of like a textbook. It's going to read through all of the different examples and show you how to do stuff. I'm running it on the emulator. So I'm not going to cover the rest of that one. There's also a part 2 to that one, believe it or not, as well. So switching from one activity to another, it's going to repeat the intent stuff. We already know about intents, I hope. If not, you can look at this one and see how the intents are working if you're not comfortable with the intents yet. But we've done intents a lot so far. The one thing I would have to remind you about is making sure to update the manifest, and that's probably the problem I'm having with the database program, is that the manifest isn't updated properly. What does the manifest have to do with any of this? Well, it's giving the allowance of the 2 activities to run. Initially, when we created the manifest, let me get rid of some of this stuff so I at least know what I'm looking at. Here's the manifest. We tell the manifest what package it's allowed to look into, which is this package here, the widgets package. For this particular example, we tell it what icon it's going to use in terms of its application. For the application that's going to sit on the desktop, what icon are you going to use? It actually lists the initial application. So in each one of these activity opening and closing tags, we're specifying out this activity and what intents, and what are we going to use an intent filter, and what are we going to allow. So in this one here, this is the main activity. We're going to notice we're going to have 2 more down here. We're going to have a button activity and we're going to have a spinner activity. Every single activity has to be listed in the manifest file, along with all of the intents. So you see in this particular example, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit redundant, And this is again where the orientation is going to be set, the screen orientation for portrait. So I could fix this problem actually by taking this out and change it to landscape. Effects. Landscape. I wonder if that's going to work. Did I spell that right? Hmm? I'm sorry? Screen orientation is set for the activity. Remember when the application first loaded up, it was in landscape, and then the screen orientation was set when the new activity was initiated. And the new activity was the second screen that came up when I clicked on one of the buttons, and one of the second screens, either one, it's going to be the button or the spinner activity. The orientation was set to portrait, which meant that the screen, although the vertical alignment inside of the layout was there, the screen was set automatically. So in contrast, now when I run this, it's all going to be in landscape. Or it should be in landscape. We'll see what happens actually when I run it. Oh, yeah. But because my emulator's in landscape. Yeah, yeah. So now we're in landscape. This is the same screen I had before, but remember we had to turn our heads to the side and I had to move the mouse around funny the other day, or the other minute. Now I'm in landscape mode instead of the orientation being set to vertical. But just keep in mind we have two different types of orientations. We have the activity orientation, which we're setting in the manifest. That's what changed this. And then we have the layout orientation. The layout itself can have a landscape or a vertical. Excuse me, vertical or horizontal. The manifest has landscape or portrait. In terms
One
of
is orientation, another is screen orientation.
Correct. This is the screen orientation. So now if I exit back, I'm still in landscape. But the funny thing was before is we didn't set the orientation for the main. If you look in the manifest file, and people go, well, how come the main came out in horizontal and then it was switched to vertical and you clicked one of those buttons and you had to switch your head around? Was because main didn't specify the orientation, so it took the default orientation. So in here, as an example, I can take out the orientation. I wonder if I can comment. No, those comments aren't going to work. I can just remove the orientation, actually, all the way up to this little closing background. Explanation here. But I have to keep this guy in, so let's go like that. Refresh my memory here. No.
Something else with exclamation. I don't know.
Yeah, let's just. I don't know either. I don't know. Between Android and let's see. Take this guy out here too. I know there's a way of doing it. I think there's two lines actually. So. So now I'm not explicitly setting the orientation. I remove those two lines, but I'm still going to get it because I'm in landscape mode. So it's not going to work. The problem was before it was set on vertical, so the thing all went on its side. Because I set the orientation to vertical, so they're both going to end up in landscape mode right now. Because that's what the main screen is picking up by default. So just keep that in mind as well. You can also set the minimum and the maximum. I didn't go through this yet. The Android code version, the minimum and maximum API. So the minimum here is going to be 8, which is not equivalent, believe it or not, to the numbering system of the Android APIs. In fact, if you go into the SDK manager, you can actually kind of see what the API versions are. And you can also see that with the emulators, when you add the emulators on. And in the SDK manager, if I look at this, I can see this column here where it says API. API number 8 is 2.2. So most of my projects are set on, I don't have an internet access, this should be a problem. Most of them are set at about 8, which is about where the significant changes happened. That other database one, if you load it in, it's actually on 3, which is way low. So you want to change it anyway, make it up higher. So the revisions you don't really care about because most of them are compatible. So but that's where you're getting the API number from, and the API number is going in right here. You can specify a minimum. Usually it's for the minimum compatibility, and then you can go max. Because here's what happens, unless you have the latest and greatest software and latest and greatest device. Normally on an Android system you buy the device, it has an operating system on it. Rarely do people actually update it. Instead you just buy a new device and you get a new operating system, but how often are you going to buy a new device? Android people don't trade their devices in as often as Apple people do. So My device has got 2.3 on it, so it's kind of old actually, but I like it. Still works for me. I still got a contract on it, so might as well keep it, right? So, but long story short, that's why I'm biased to 2.3, and I have all my APIs set to that. But I have found other people also have 2.3 and 2.3.0. Unless you just went out and bought a brand new system, brand new device, you're not going to have 4. Anything. In fact, a lot of new devices don't have 4. On them either, because that just came out like a couple months ago. When are you going to have it? In fact, a lot of people aren't even using Windows 8 yet. That's been out like 6 months or so on your Windows system. You're still not even upgraded to 8 yet. So it takes a while for people to upgrade. So you don't necessarily want to build just for the latest and greatest. You want to make sure you're backward compatible a little bit back to what the average person is using. So right now, probably could go a little higher, probably about 3 or 4, maybe 3.0. Probably can go higher. In fact, I should trade this guy and get a more up-to-date one, I think. So. All right, that was your widgets. That one went successfully. Yes?
So including that tag, is that just a good common practice to identify when an SDK, or is that just optional because of the kind of little widgets? Or
Where do you see tags?
they use this SDK tag?
Oh, this is, you're calling this a tag. You want to put this in all the time. In fact, if I create a brand new project, I believe it's already going to be set for me, but let me just take a look here. If I create a brand new project and have a brand new manifest that has not been modified, let's see, Android application project, we get test. And I open up my test project here. It's set for 4.22. If I go into my manifest file, I have a version code 1. Look at that. I have well, it's separated out actually now because it's a more current project type. Minimum SDK is about 8. So I think that's standard right now. This is an 8. I think people are still on 2 point something. They're above 2.2. Most people are on 2.3 something. And this is a 2.33 actually, which runs all on net. Anything 2 point something runs on 8, I believe. You got to go to 7 is 1 point something. So it's usually major breaks. So, and then 17 I believe is 4 point something. But if I made a project a year from now, the current is going to be like 20. So this is going to change, and this is probably going to change a little bit too. You don't have to leave it on the defaults though. You can leave it on. You can change those around if you want. The other thing people don't know is this here, this version code. When you put this, next time I see you, we're going to put some apps in a Google Play. When you do that, this gets recorded. This information shows up in when you install the app. Actually, if you want, you can look at your app screen when you're installing it. After you press that little, from the file manager, from the SD card, and you install it that way, you can still see it. You don't see as much information. The regular install, especially from the download from the store and the install there, shows you everything. Everything in there, you're going to see all this stuff. You're going to see version code. Oh, this is 1.0. Oh, wow, this is not that old. So a lot of people don't think about that until they start deploying the app. That maybe you want to give it a name. Maybe you want to give it a real application name in here. Because in here you got an app name that goes along with it. Here's a name here. App name. Maybe it's still called Hello World. Or maybe, you want to make, and this is a string, so you go in here in the string file. You won't think about this until you actually start, like, deploying your app. But here, this is going to be like, app name is called test. Because it's called test out here. So I'm going to deploy this into the store. It's going to be my fabulous app. It's going to be called test. So that's one of the things you have to do as a checklist. In fact, when you go through some of the guides that go through the, I'm going to upload this into Google Play. So they're going to say, remove all the logs. You can't use a log. It doesn't work. So it's extra code, and it's extra processing your app doesn't need. So you remove all the logs. You take out all the debug information. You make sure you got an app name there correctly. You make sure you review the minimum and the maximum on the supported things. You check your orientations out. It's just like a whole there's like 20 items on this checklist. You remove the test cases. Remove all that stuff out because your user's not going to see the test cases, and it adds bulk to your app. Because what you don't want is the user to sit there and go, wait a minute, it's still downloading? Wait a minute, it's downloading, downloading. Ooh, this thing's big. It's going to take up too much room on my disk. You know, or you open up the app and it says there's a bunch of red stuff in there. It says, you know, it needs permission for this, needs permission for this, needs permission for this, needs permission for this. And they're going to go, well, I'm not installing this thing. This thing's going to need permission for everything, which means, you know, it's probably a virus or something. Did I end up with a problem here? I ended up with a problem here. And if I opened up the console on the bottom here, I should see the problem. I think the problem is going to be with my API because I don't have 4.2 installed. I think. So if I go up here into the project and I got into projects up here, no, I do have 4.2. So that's not the problem. So what is the problem with this? I can't create a, can I create a something here and not have a problem? Menu, main's not in there. Did I accidentally delete it? Let's see. Menu. Main, no, it's there. It's my R file that hasn't updated correctly. Let's just leave this alone. Actually, if I did this, it would probably fix the problem, get rid of it. I don't use it. That's the other thing, too, I don't like is, why in the world do we have this options menu now? In the old days, we didn't have it. It looked like that. Because people couldn't figure out how to put an options menu in. So now the template, I like the idea of the template having the onCreate, because you need the onCreate. Every single activity's got an onCreate method. It's part of the life cycle. But what do we need an options menu for? And half the time I don't use it. So, but other people do use it. So I got rid of the options menu. I'm not quite sure why there was an error with that, actually. So the other thing you might notice, and I've done it actually a couple of times already, is to run the clean on it. So if you go to the project window and you hit clean, what does this do? It rebuilds your r.java file, and it cleans out all the temporary memory, and it's supposed to be doing garbage collecting, getting rid of all that stuff in the project. But I still see that this project's got some issues associated with it. So we'll just leave this project alone. But it's probably associated with, I don't know, something I clicked on. So I'm going to delete this project because I don't need it. Let's move right along. And I want to talk about content providers now. So now we had a little bit of break in terms of the heavy-duty stuff. This was supposed to be the fun stuff. The widget stuff was supposed to be fun too. If you go through the rest of this widget thing, and I'll go through all of the different things associated with the spinner, we actually have seen all this stuff already. We've seen it in different examples. So if you want a little bit more information where it's coming from, I highly recommend going through the widgets and then going through the widgets example. So what I want to do now is kind of switch gears a little bit, talk about content providers and what's available. We saw one the other day, the first weekend, we made a project that used an address book as a content provider. And I have that project, but I also have a couple of other ones that are listed that are in the, I call them my legacy because they're the older examples, but they do still work. They're ones that are called Content 1 and Content 2. But Content 1 is the one we want to look at, and Content Demo is going to be the second one. So let's take a look at where they are if I have internet access, which I believe I don't. I don't. Oh, I do. I have internet access. If you do need to leave, go ahead. It's okay. I understand it is Easter. There we go. So this is where I'm getting the content examples from. You're going to want these because you're going to want to play around with it. Because this is what makes your app look like really sophisticated, you know, because it's using content that's on the phone. It's kind of like the SMS stuff. People love to play around with that. So if I go into the supplemental notes is where I'm going to find these. And what I'm looking at now is the one that says Content Provider Example 1 and Content Provider Example 2. They might actually not say Content Provider 1 and Content Provider 2 when you download them. Instead, they're going to be looking at this. It's going to say Content Provider Example and Content User Demo, or what they're called. Go ahead and load them both into, let me close this one, into Eclipse. what I want to do is just kind of, instead of giving you all the notes on it, I want to talk about the project too and see how they're different, compare them. It's kind of like the intent examples. When you go through a couple of them, eventually they start looking a little redundant. So, let me get rid of drawing here too. Okay, clean things up here a little bit. Okie dokie. So the first one I'm going to start out with is the content user demo. And it's based on a 2.2 API, so if you're getting an error, like a little red thing down below here on the log, go ahead and upgrade your project type. Make it more current if you don't have an emulator or if you don't have 2.2 API installed. So I'm going to go ahead and run this guy so you can kind of see what it does. Content provider demo. Now it looks like it's giving me music, ringtones, volumes. Looks like it's giving me volume settings. If I click in here, I can move down here and I see an entire list of stuff. Looks like settings, doesn't it? Looks like airplane mode toggle, auto time, screen brightness. I got an entire list, scroll list here, ringtone. Just set, I have ringtone set on this thing. Volume, last ring, audio, soft key. So this is content that I'm getting. These are my settings actually that I'm getting. Some of my settings information. I'm getting this from the phone. That's what I'm using on the phone. So I can change this stuff programmatically through my app. I can change my, I don't like my ringtone, or I don't like the volume, or I don't like something about one of these settings. I'm going to go ahead and change it. So let's take a look at the code. In the code, we have simple Java file, just one file. And the file is called content user. It's the activity. It's just a regular old activity that extends activity. On the onCreate method, here's the biggest one here. We're using an instance of content resolver. So content provider, content resolver, cursors. We've looked at cursors already, which is why I wanted to cover the databases together, because all the stuff works together. We get a cursor. Same way as we query a database and we get a cursor that comes back, we query a content provider through a content resolver in this particular case, and we get a cursor that comes back, and we're just going to, in this particular case, we're just going to take all the cursor information, load it up into a string array, and put it in a list box, list view. That's what we did here. So, believe it or not, this is the entire program code that we're looking at. Nothing else to it. Just like as an example, the SMS stuff, there's not very much to it. The map stuff, not very much to it. When you use the APIs and the content and the provider information, not that much to it. It's not like heavy-duty programming. But which is the funny thing is people think this is like really sophisticated when you can get at the phone's contact list. You can get at this, you can get that. I mean, I can send a text message and all that. It seems like it's like really popular like features that people want to put in, like getting. In fact, how many people like they want to get at the image library, or they want to take an image, and I got a camera one I'm going to show you in a few minutes. You know, it just loads up the content provider, loads up the image gallery, loads up the songs, loads up, you know, just play some music, just do whatever you want to do. It's just loading and making instances of the resolvers or providers. So in this particular case, we're getting the content provider and the cursor that goes along with it. So content resolver, which I've got highlighted here, this is the big mystery here. We're making an instance of it. In order to do that, we actually have to import it. So we've got it right here, content resolver, and it's coming from content. And we're also looking at the database cursor that comes in, because it is a database concept, but we're just going to load it into a cursor. It comes from a database package. Cursor is equal to, well, this is the CR that we've got over here, content resolver.query. That looks like what we did earlier today. We're going to query it, but instead of sending it, because we're not working with a cursor, that because CR is a content resolver, it's not a database. If CR was a SQL database, then we could put a query in there because it's going to understand that, and it would be a text string that we're sticking in here. Instead, now we have settings.system.content_URI. That's where we're getting the system settings that we just looked at. I have my ringtone in there. I got I don't know, some other stuff that was in there. It's all the settings that are available on the phone. So we're getting the settings so we can tell, do you have Bluetooth turned on? Do you not have Bluetooth? Do you want to turn Bluetooth on? Stuff like that. Do you want the Wi-Fi turned on? Do you want to use infrared? Let's change your ringtone, you know, or something like that, right? The null, just like we saw before with the database stuff, we're just not setting it. So what you're going to do is you're going to go online, you're going to look at the content provider, and you're going to go, well, actually, do I have access? I do. This is good. Let me just show you an example of this. If I come over here to Google, and I can say, let's see what we want. Content resolver settings.system. Are we not having internet access? Okay, maybe I'm not. Oh, there we go. So content resolver system dot. Well, we can get it from Google Docs, but I don't necessarily want to get it from not Google Docs, Android developer. I want to get it from a settings system. So I'm going to go settings system. And then I want to know what the parameters are. So eventually what I'm going to end up is probably going here. This is going to be the developer site. And then I'm going to look in here, I'm going to go, what do we have here? We have database SQLite. We have all these APIs over here. And what we've selected, we selected the API for Content Resolver. And then down here on the bottom, I'm going to see all of the different constraints that I can put in. And then this is where the tricky part comes into place, is every time they update the APIs, they have different constraints. They have different parameters and they have different format to it. So nobody ever memorizes all the different switches and things that you can do to it. Instead, what you're going to do is look at this and go, well, this is coming from content URI. Okay, and then, you know, what do I need to do? So you're going to go probably follow by example, see what's worked in the past, and or go online and look it up and see what the switches are. So here we have the cursor. We're just pulling it out of system settings system. So we could pull that out of something else if we wanted to, if we knew what to pull it out of. So we got to find out what content provider we're interested in looking at. Here we're going to set the activity to manage the cursor. So we're going to start a managing cursor. So the start of the managing cursor, nothing more than making it active. So it's capturing the information and working with it. So then we're going to log it, and we're going to just log that we have it, and there's a count. I didn't look at my log, but if I run it again, I can take a look at the log. It's probably going to give me the total number, it looks like. It's going to get the count from the cursor. How many items are in here? How many we're looking at? And then we're going to get the list view set up. So we're going to use a list view, and we're going to find, we have a list view on our interface. And we're going to take a string, and the string is going to contain all of the name information that's in the settings, and then the settings system value, what it's set to. And then we're going to have an integer array that's going to be set up. That's going to be the 2. This is going to be the set text name and text value that are going to be in here, and then the simple cursor adapter. So the simple cursor adapter, which is already made for us actually, that's going to be used to display the information, and we're going to set the list view to set the adapter to the adapter, and the adapter is the one we created that was a simple cursor adapter. So if I look at the manifest file, I'm going to see that I have permissions here, and the permissions here is to read contacts, which is interesting. Do I need to read contacts for system information? But which is interesting. It's working for the system information. But normally you have to set the permission for the content provider that you're going to look at. So maybe this one is just going to open the door anyway for us. Now let's see if I can format this better. Nope. Oh, now I see if you highlight it. Someone said if you highlight it and you do that, it does. It does work. So worked in this case. So what we're doing is just setting the activity, and then we're setting the intent. We have to use the intent filter here for the activity. We only have one activity, but we still have to list the intent filter in order to use it. And then the actions coming from main, and the category is going to be a launcher. We're going to launch something. We're going to launch is the content provider. We're adding the Android permissions to read contacts. Am I in the right content demo? Let's see if I actually read the. Let's see if I'm actually in the right. Yep, This is it, but in the console. Probably not going to log it. Interesting. Okay. We'll leave that one alone. So we do see a music volume is set on 11. I guess I could have put it could have been a space in here. Ring volume is set on 5. When I do click on the item, let's see what's happening. I believe I'm getting some message down here when I'm clicking on an item. Can't open, yeah. Can't open keyboard. It's giving me some interesting. I did not set a click. I did not set an on-click listener. So there's no on-click listener, so when you click on the items, nothing is really going to happen. Although I do see some status messages showing up when I click on a couple of items. So, but what we're looking at is the name and then the value. So my ring, my volume alarm is set to 6, and my volume voice is set to 4. So I can probably see the language in here. I can probably see all of the other things that I have, the notification, low battery indicator, stuff like that. So simple. Easy. We can write to it. We can read them. We're just reading them. We're not going to write to it, which is probably why that manifest is working. So normally you have to list the permission to use the content provider. Okay, so the other one is called the content provider example. So I'm going to close this one. This one was content user demo. Content provider example. Let me just make sure that this one is the one I'm thinking it is. Is got the first one just read the system settings and put them in the list box along with the name and the value that's associated with them. This one's going to read write. So this one's going to do a little bit more. And this is going to work with the contacts. So we have a button that says view contacts, and then this says add contacts, modify contacts, delete contacts. And I believe I have some interesting contacts in here. So if I view the contacts from the example that we used here, which is kind of interesting, this was the example that we did for the content provider with the list view adapter, where we added, I believe we had another example because I put in a bunch of contacts in here that didn't make any sense, like another person was one of them, name with email last name. Remember we were having problems getting that to work. So if I delete a contact, it's going to delete the contact with a sample name. It's hard set to just delete a contact. It's not using anything to select the contact. It's basically just going to, and then here modify. It's going to update the phone number of a sample contact, add a contact, created a new contact, sample contact. So if I view it, I've got probably a new contact at the end here. This is just going to go through and put up a toast message for each item in here. And there it is, sample name, phone number of that new contact I added. So I can see I can manipulate the contact list by adding and editing, add, edit, modify, delete, all the different ones there. So it's a sample of showcase a working native content provider of the contact list. So it's very similar to the last one. It's just doing a little bit more functionality. We'll take a look at the code. That's why they're both sort of together. Native content provider. The reason why it's called a native content provider is because it's using the native content on the phone versus we're using an API that's going to create a contact list for you, or an API that's going to work on top of it as a content provider. Believe it or not, there's Android APIs that work with content providers because people can't figure out how to use the content providers. So you put in another API that creates contacts for you and changes settings for you and does a bunch of stuff at a higher level of abstraction. But this is pretty simple in my opinion. I don't know. I think anyone should be able to work with a content provider. It's not even as hard as list adapters. So. Alright, so the native content provider extends activity just like before. This should look familiar. We have a button for the view, button for the add, button for the delete. Have an on-click listener. On-click listener is going to run display contacts. On-click listener here is going to run create contacts. On-click listener here is going to run update contacts, delete contacts. It actually isn't performing. Is it performing? It's not performing. Yes, it is. The performing functionality is down below here. So with our onClick listener, we have a view set onClick listener that's going to be one for display contacts, one for create contacts. So we've created 1, 2, 3, 4 methods associated with the 4 methods for the onClick associated with the 4 buttons, and we've done them by adding the listener and then putting the anonymous implementation of the method underneath it. So if you've noticed here, it says add set onClick listener, modify set onClick listener, delete set onClick listener. This is demonstrating yet another way that I rarely do because it's kind of tedious. I had to write the code 4 times actually. Could have put it all in one onClick method, gave it a name, and we could have put the same listener on all the buttons, and then when the listener is activated and then onClick, we say, what button is it? So button number 1, button number 2, button number 3. But I don't have an example that does it this way, so this is the tedious way of doing it. And then the last example actually used an onClick listener, so it was actually, and actually it used a click button as well. So yet another way of doing it. So now we got the methods here. So this one's going to do a delete contact, and then we have an update contact, and then we have a create contact. And so what are these methods going to do? The methods are right here. So we have a display contacts, which is the first one, and then we have a create contacts, and then we have a update contacts, and then we probably have a delete contacts on the bottom here, so we have a delete contacts. All of them are pretty much the same. So again, it's a little bit redundant in terms of what it's accomplishing. But this code is not the best in terms of a lack of redundancy. You might notice each one of them is creating a new content resolver instance. So here we have content resolver CR, an instance of this content resolver object. And this one here has the same thing, content resolver. And then they're all going on proceeding to say, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to query the contact list. Yeah, didn't we just do that? We're going to do it again right here. Query the contact, this is where we're going to update the data. So we're not going to query this one. We're going to update the data on this one. And then on this one, we're going to get the contact resolver, and we're going to update the data, or display the data. So it's basically doing similar methods, but it's all broken out to make it easier for some people to understand. So sometimes when you make it more sophisticated, it's harder to deal with. But for the cursor, here the cursor is going to take this content resolver query. Same thing we looked at in the first example, actually. So this one's very similar to it. It's going to use the cur.move to next to traverse through each item that's going to be in the list. And then we're going to have an integer parse integer, which is going to be a string that's going to come out of it because we're going to pick out the numbers. And then we're basically going to do a query down here to set the contact. So contact.common.data.kinds.phone. So we have to know what's inside of it, so we can get the .phone, the .email, the .text, everything's associated with it. So here we're just going to look at the phone number because this method here is going to display the contents. So we're just going to display the name, the phone number, and contact ID, which one are they? And then here we're going to put it all into one toast message. So it's the name, phone number, looks like just the name and the phone number are being shown in the toast message. It's down here. And then that's showing each one of them in a toast message, and this one's actually just going to show you a toast. Each one of them does show you a toast message at the end. This one here is going to basically create an array list that's going to go through and look at each one of the contacts, and we're now going to create a contact. So it's going to create an array what's on there, then we're going to write one to the end of it. So this array here that's out here, we're going to go array.add, because we're calling it, this is a content provider operation, which is what we're going to put this array list type, which is coming from, again, collections from Java. Nothing new, which is why I kind of think if you're going to get into this, not a bad idea to learn Java, because then it's amazing how often a list structure from collections comes up, or array list, or queues, or stacks, and stuff like that. And it's all Java code, actually. It's all core Java. But here we have the array list that we're going to use, and then we're going to add to it. because it's a content provider, we're going to add to it. We're going to add to it. We're going to add to it a new name. It's going to be account name.gmail. We're going to we're going to create a new contact by adding some, what account we're going to put it in. Everyone's got a Gmail account, right? Actually, you do if you're on a tablet, Android. We're going to put a raw ID, contact ID in there, name, display name, telephone number. So what we're doing with this code is just create a fake contact with this hard set. We could make this example a little bit more user-friendly. We could put like maybe a couple of text boxes out there. In fact, this is something you can do. You can throw a bunch of edit texts out there, have the user type in a new contact, and then press create contact. Instead of hard setting these things, which is what we're doing here, and we're setting it to some account name at gmail.com, and we're setting some generic information that's being put in here. You can actually just take it from the get text, from the edit text field, put it in there, actually. Make it a little bit more sophisticated. What we're going to do here, we're going to do a try and a catch, actually. We're going to add it, so we're going to see our apply batch. And the apply batch is going to be contact authority. And then what we're going to do is give it the ops, which is this array that we've added all this stuff into, which is our list plus one item at the end of the list, so, which is going to be our creating a new contact. And we're going to create a new contact with a contact name, and then we're going to put it out on the screen. And then we're going to try and do it. If you don't get it, we're going to print the stack out, and it's going to end up being actually it's going to print to a console window. It's not even going to print anything on the GUI. So normally you would see, actually, instead of print stack here, you're going to see something like a toast message that comes out. So that's going to print it to a console window. Who's got a console window on their Android phone? We got one in the developer though. So that's the other thing too. People don't realize you can print stuff to the console window, and it's like, why do you have that code in there when you deploy your app? There's no console window. So there's actually a couple of little things out there you can download, terminal prompts and stuff, and you can see stuff happen actually sometimes, which is why people get the terminal prompts on their phones. Here's the update. I don't have to go through all of this because it's really much doing the same thing. It's taken the contacts here. We got data. We got a display name. We're going to have a MIME type that's going to be set. MIME type. We're going to have a contact item type, the home telephone number. So we're going to find out which fields we want to do. We're going to take those fields and we're going to update it. We're going to change this and change that. So I guess we could have put another couple of boxes out there. Take the values from the boxes instead of hard setting the information and change it. Because really what we're just doing is setting it to somebody's name and some generic contact name, which is going to be equal to name in this particular case. And we've set name and something else up here at the top. So let me take a look at the top of the code where we've set these variables. We haven't set it. Must have set it down here. Here we go. Sample name. So this contact we got is a sample name, and this is how we're creating this contact. And the address is going to be, or the telephone number is 12345. So not really doing very much in this create contact, but we could send it instead of sending it sample name. So on the create contact, we're taking on the name and the telephone number. So here we have the name, the telephone number. So we could easily modify this if you wanted to. So you can change your, if you don't like your contact address book, you can write an app that changes, goes through and modifies, changes stuff. And some people actually do it to add pictures and stuff like that too. So this is just working with names and addresses because it's backward compatible before pictures were part of contacts. I'm not even sure if pictures are still part of contacts. But, there's some other stuff. We can display a picture of the person. So might be full of smoke here because I don't know if it's really I don't know if it's really saved in the contact list, but at least it's not on Android. It might be on iPhone though. I think it is on iPhone, but I don't think we have pictures being stored for people on Android, but I could be wrong. Does anyone know? Does your contact list store pictures? Yeah, you see someone's picture show up? Okay, good. So we do have that. So this is lacking that capability. But you can add it in actually. So you can take a picture, save the picture. So, but then again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, why don't we just use the native app that's there? Which is a good question. Why do we want to do this at all? because we want to change something in it. We want to, it's a content provider. We're just basically going to add some context to it. Well, what if your app was an app that maybe it was a student app and it was keeping track of all your teachers and all their email addresses and stuff? When you want to add it to the contact list, why make the person go to the contact list, add it to their contacts list manually? The app can go ahead and add it to the contact list, right? You know, without them even knowing behind the scenes, and then pull it from the contact list if you wanted to. Actually, you'll see that in some of the apps, like you'll see like 911 or 411. You'll see a bunch of stuff added to your contacts, and you go, "Where'd that come from?" It's like some app put it in there for you because they thought you wanted to call customer service for Verizon. Actually, you'll see Verizon's telephone number. Actually, if you have a Verizon phone, you'll see it in the contacts list. Where'd that come from? There's some app, and then the app can update it. You know, when the telephone number changes, when they move their call centers around and stuff. So. Any questions on content providers? That's really nothing to it. It's actually kind of straightforward. The only way you're going to really learn it is play around with it. So I highly recommend playing around with it and seeing what you can do with it. Another interesting content provider that's out there is the ability to use the camera. So students usually love this little camera demonstration. So we'll go ahead and look at this one next. I'm going to close this project. Actually, I'm going to pull this project out of here. I've been trying to clean up my system with everything I've gone over so I can remember what I've gone over. Although this is day number 2, so I guess I don't really need to clean it out. But let's take a look at the camera demo because people like to use the camera. You can also do this on an iPhone. You can do all these things on an iPhone. Not working on my device. How it actually did work once, and it took a picture of the room actually, and then it didn't show the picture though. The app kind of blew up on me at that point. And I'm gonna see what, like, this is made for 2.2. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna change the. I'm gonna upgrade the API and see if that might fix the problem here. I'm gonna put it on the 2.3.3. Here's the interesting thing that you're going to run into. So for features of the phone, like the content providers, actually, the camera's not necessarily a content provider. It's a different way of doing something, but you're going to have very specific hardware requirements. Certain things are only going to work on certain APIs and above because things change. Megapixels on cameras change, camera techniques change, the hardware changes, the drivers change, the APIs have to change. So if you're running on older hardware, this is where you might run into an issue. Did your camera work? Did you try it?
It just crashed on me.
Oh. So depending upon, this is a very old example. It's using a Java file I/O. Actually check your SD card because what you're going to have is a bunch of files. If it crashed on you, it didn't show it, you're probably going to have a bunch of JPG files that are going to be on the window. In fact, I can probably tell you, I can probably show you on my screen here. If I run that camera app that's still installed on my system here, camera demo. I ran it at the break, and it took a picture. No, it didn't. Let's see if I can. And I ended up with about 30 different JPEG files that ended up on the desktop. It's actually working right now, which is kind of weird. Okay, so we'll just leave that alone and show you the example. It's writing a file, so this is doing a couple of things. It's showing you persistent data. It's doing file I/O. You may, if it's crashing, it could be one of two things. You might not have access to your SD card turned on.
I installed other stuff.
Okay.
It's just this one.
Interesting. So the functionality of the app, if it does work, should look something like this. If you're going to load it on an emulator, and actually I can try to do it on my 4.0 emulator, make sure that you have the emulator installed and the emulator is not running from an ISO disk because it does write a file. It's writing a file to your SD card. So the app looks like this. It says camera demo on the top of it when you run it, and when you click the button here where it says it plays a little audio sound, and it looks like it takes a picture. It actually is simulating a picture. However, it's not saving anything on here. It's not going to bring anything up because I don't have an SD card. This is running from an ISO image. So I could, and this is one thing I probably should do just for sakes of testing. I'm going to load it on, and in certain emulators we have camera support, by the way. So you can actually load the camera on the built-in Android emulators. At this point, I'm not bringing it up. But what I could do is loaded on this 4-point emulator that I have. It's installed, so it's actually running on a virtual hard disk. Whether it's going to be supported by the older API is going to be a different question. But see how I've got a, and this is the interesting thing here I wanted to show you here. I've got a startup, and then I've got a fake SD card. You can install a fake SD card into the emulators. This one actually has one already installed. And this is on the VirtualBox emulator. You can do it on the built-in emulators. If you go into the emulator features, you'll see one of the options here. And I'll do that right now to show you what I'm talking about. If I go into the Virtual Device Manager, one of the things you can do, and for example here, I can click on here and I can click on Edit. I'm going to see generally down here where it says a front camera emulated, or I can use a webcam for the front camera. So I can set the web, if my computer has a camera on it, I can simulate it through the webcam, or I can emulate it. In fact, I have a webcam. Let me try this out actually. Back camera, I'm going to leave the back camera alone. Where it says internal storage here, I can set the internal storage. I can also set an SD card. So I'll try this out, no hopes, but I'm going to put an SD card here at 256, and I'm going to see if this actually works. So I've set an SD card, and I've set some RAM here. RAM's pretty low, but I've set the front camera. So if I run it now on this emulator here, I'm not going to run it here yet. I'm going to run it on my other one because my other one's actually set up already. If I run it on my Android startup, here we go. Oops, no, we want to do this one. This one has an SD card, and I believe it's filtering the camera simulation through the camera. So it's going to take a picture of me because the camera's facing me on this particular case. It's a front camera. So what I should see when I run this app is a picture. See, on the other one, I know it's not working because I have an empty picture that shows up. So I should see a picture coming from the camera, which is how I'm going to know that the app's actually working. You also have to set permissions on the phone to use the SD card. You may also have to use it for the camera. I'm not quite sure what the settings are these days.
Just because all the other apps I installed and worked fine. It's just this one that's
This one is also based on an older API. So you might want to try compiling it with 4 point something, higher API, change the API level. That way you'll get the drivers that are appropriate for your device. So let's see if I have any better luck on this one. What I want to do is simulate a camera. I want to see the camera is what I want to see. If I'm not seeing the camera, I'm not going to get a picture taken, that's for sure. So let's see, here's the details of this guy here. This is the one I edited? This is not the one I edited. I edited this one here. So if I feel lucky, I can run this one. We'll see what happens. I've got this one running, so I'm going to close this guy for a second and see if I can run it on my VirtualBox emulator. You can run the configuration and have it auto-select, actually. Always prompt here. Oh, looks like got some good deal here going. So, launch canceled. What does it say? Oh, this emulator has a problem with the examples. I need to uninstall. It's the same problem I was getting before when I was running. This emulator's got issues, so I probably should not use this emulator. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is take my chances and try the built-in emulator. The one that I just created that has the camera emulation on it, and it also has the SD card, and I believe it is going to be this one here. But you know what I'm going to do is just to make sure is I'm going to rename the emulator so I know which one I'm talking about. So this one here says it's got an internal storage, it's got an SD card, and a front camera. So I'm going to put here camera and card, SD card. And this is actually not a 4, it's level 10. No, this is a 2.3. Okay, we'll leave it alone. So a good thing I did change it because it turned out to be this one right here. So now I'm going to run it to see if I have any better luck with it on the emulator. This is another thing that's going to be hard to test. So we're launching it. We're good. So we should be able to simulate the camera on the current emulators. I'm not quite sure if this version of this emulator is going to do it, but we'll see. I might have to get a more up-to-date emulator. I believe this is still backward. So let's take a look at the code so we know what we're looking at while this is running. I'm going to have a tag I'm going to create for logging purposes, and it's going to be called camera demo. And we're going to have a camera, which is an object that we're going to use. That's going to be an object of the phone. It's going to be camera. We're going to have preview. It's going to be preview. And these are the data types, actually. We're importing here the camera. So this is coming from Android hardware. Android hardware camera dot picture callback and shutter callback. So we're going to put these objects out there. We're also going to look at a frame layout. So we're making instances to represent the components of the camera, the preview, and then the button. And the button's going to be the button click, which is going to be taking our picture. So on the create, we are going to have the preview is going to be equal to a new preview, this. It's just going to be a preview window, which allows us to look at content. Frame layout, we're going to find the frame layout by the preview. We're going to add the view to the preview. And then we're going to look at the button clicks. We're going to put a button click listener. So we have an on-click listener on the button, and then we're going to have an on-click on the on-click event that is anonymous on-click event for the camera. It's going to take picture. So camera.takePicture. All that's done by the camera itself. And the camera itself is the object that we made an instance of called a camera. So we're going to have a shutter callback, a raw callback, and a JPEG callback. So we're going to create JPEG files out of this. And then we're going to log from our tag on created. So we're going to see how far we got. So we can basically test this using the log to see how far we're going to get. And we're going to create a shutter callback, call it shutter callback. It's going to be equal to a new shutter callback. And the shutter callback is essentially going to be able to load these are the objects that are being used by the camera hardware, and this is the abstraction of the camera hardware that's going to create the components that are needed to take the pictures to add them to the photo gallery. Shutter callback is nothing more than the information that's coming back that's going to be encapsulated into the file that we're going to create. So we're going to take the shutter callback, make a file out of it, copy it onto the SD card. And so instead of putting it in your library, which this is not going to do, it's not going to populate the content provider. Instead, it's going to take pictures and save the pictures with a random number. And the number is going to be followed by .jpg. And you can go to your, let me mount this. I took a picture actually a few minutes ago on the camera app that's on here. I'm going to mount it. I'm going to see what this picture looks like and see what this file looks like. That is, unless I deleted it. And in a moment, I should see it on my desktop here. The SD card. Connect. Okay. Let's see if it's still on here. Connected. It's connected. Here it is. On the SD card. Oh, didn't take it. Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, I should have seen a JPEG image on here. It's not going to show up in here. These are going to be different pictures, and they are different pictures. But not going to show up in the camera roll. It should show up out here. So let me stop this for a second. Let's see. Eject this here. I should be, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the emulator to do it, but I should be able to simulate it on the phone itself. Let's see, now that I've changed the API on it, let's see. Let me just see if I can get it to work on here one more time. No, it's quitting. Now it's force quitting on me. Alright, we'll just leave it alone for right now. So anyway, what we're looking at, and hopefully this is loading up in the background because I want to see it on the emulator at least, handles all of the, so we have the picture, the shutter callback. Oops, what do we got going on here? The trace window is going to come up, which means I think it's going to be loading here. Yep, it is loading. Launch canceled. Failed to install camera on device. No. Let me just do something else here real quick. Change the project type back to a 2. Let's go back to 2.2 as low as possible here. Let's run the sucker on the. Let's run it on this guy again. Just want to go down on the API to see, because of the drivers that are being used in here. The API. Oh, launch canceled. Timed out. 554 timed out. You're timing out. Alright. Let's try plan B. If I can shut these down. Actually, let's do this again. Let me copy this newly compiled one. Demo. Okay, so emulator is going to bomb out any moment now. I've got the unresponsive act of the emulator here. Force quit. Ooh, it won't even force quit. Oh, there it is. Okay, force quit that emulator. Let me take one more stab at it through the VirtualBox emulator. I have an idea actually. At least we can see the log activity, although the emulator is not going to save because the emulator that is configured for this API that's being used is not, no, yeah, the door's staying open. The door is staying open. I know, but unfortunately you're not going to be able to do it till my class is over. You guys want fresh air, don't you? Oh, okay. We do. I want fresh air. Remember how hot it got when that door was shut? Where's my TA? Oh, I think, let's see if they leave on their own for a second. Alright, let's see if we can get something working here. We should be able to see the log, actually. Should be able to write to the log when we use the functionality here. So let's see. Here we go, the log is writing. There we go, we got it. So the starting the activity, we're starting the intent for the Android. Category Android intent launcher. Examples, camera demo. Okay, so we have the activity running. The intent actually goes out and grabs the camera to launch it. We're not going to see the camera, which is not a big deal, but we should see that what happens when we press the button. We should see the different stages in the log because of those log messages that are in there. So let's take a look here at the log. Device disconnected. Can't open keymap. So let's see. There is a filter that I can filter on for the log. We're still running. Let's take a look here. The tag that we're looking at is called camera demo. So this is why we put a tag in here, by the way, because when we write the log, this is a great way of actually troubleshooting the problem. The log is going to write out on created, was created on things that, everything that happened in each one of the different stages of this particular example. So I can filter the log if I go over here. I still have it running. I can write a filter. I'm going to call it a camera. Actually, I'll just call it the same as the tag. And here we go. This is what I wanted to see. So, because I'm playing, it's not really called poor man's editing, but it really is poor man's testing, because I can't see a picture on my camera on my emulator. Instead, I'm going to rely on the log. So what I've got is I've got the raw picture that was taken, on picture taken raw, on picture taken JPEG, on Shutter-D, which is essentially going to tell me that everything is working because each one of the methods is being visited. Problem is, I'm not going to get an SD card over here because I don't have one. But every time I do, I'm not going to get a picture taken because I don't have the camera set up. And I'm not going to have an SD card picture saved on it because I don't have a SD card. But every time I do this, I should get multiple entries that show up in here that are going to happen with the activity. And so I can see that the activity here has happened. So I can see that the app is actually working as my emulator testing. That's not going to be cooperating with me. Earlier versions of the emulator never had camera support. Current versions actually are supposed to, but getting it to work is not necessarily the most efficient. So what I'm going to do now that I see it's actually working, I'm going to copy it onto my device and see if I can get it to at least simulate it on my device so that I can show you what happens on the SD card, because I can mount the SD card on this computer and you can see the pictures actually. So I'm going to now come back here and see if I can attempt to remount. Oh, there we go. Connect to the storage. Going to connect my device, install the app on the device, take some pictures, and show you what ends up on the SD card, hopefully. This worked earlier, so I'm hoping it's going to work again. I just tested it actually at the lunch break that we had. But after the lunch break, everything started breaking, so let's see. I have a camera demo, very good. It's on here. So the files are going to end up just sequentially numbered by some random number that we're going to give it. So let's see. So I'm going back to the device, opening up the Lynda File Manager, going to the SD card, clicking on the camera demo. Your app will be installing or replacing another app. Yes, I know. You can see actually one of the things that you can see on the device, and I can show you this from a distance because I can't show it to you on the emulator, is that when you install it, it'll say, do you want to install this application with a question, and it says, allow this application to, and then I see all these red actual things, and you can't read it from your distance, but what it says is storage, modify, delete USB storage contents, because it's writing those files to the storage. The other one is device calls, read device status and identity. It's looking at the camera, so it needs to have device access. In the manifest, we've set this. Also, the last item, it says hardware controls, take pictures and videos. So then I can tell what this app is going to be doing on the device, and then I can decide if I want to install it or not. So I'm going to install it, so I'm going to say yes. So once I've got it installed, I'm going to press open and pray that it doesn't crash. And it crashed. Alright, so it's not going to cooperate. It did run on my lunch hour, however, which gives me at least some satisfaction, and I see it running in here. I'm going to have some difficulties, though, testing this one to see why it's crashing. It's giving you one of those exceptional errors. When those errors happen, who knows what the problem could be. It's definitely going to be a hard one to troubleshoot. But I can see from the demonstration here, if I go back and look at the code, let's take a look to see what's going on here. So we have the three devices, the camera, the preview, which is probably what's failing actually. But I'm not getting the original to come up either. But let's see. On create is creating a new preview this, which is going to allow the whole screen to show the picture. It's going to be it's a different view. So then we're going to have a frame layout with this. That's probably the problem. It's probably not supported. Finding the view ID with the add view preview. And then a couple buttons, one button on here with a button click event. We've already gone through this one here. The click event is going to do a take picture method on the camera. So we're running a method called take picture on the camera object that we created. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're just using the functionality that's provided to us from the hardware. and then handles the data for the raw picture. Here we're going to create the raw picture. So we've got this raw picture that was taken. In fact, we should see it down here on picture taken raw. So we know we've gotten that far. The on picture taken raw works on the simulator. Whoops. Let's go back to the code. Oops, sorry. So these are those tags that are showing up in the DDMS window. It lets me know it worked. It didn't fail yet. So handle the picture. So what we're going to do here, this is the file I/O part. This is identical to file I/O in Java, except for we're using the directory of the SD card instead. So this is going to handle the data for the JPEG picture. So once we get the picture from the on picture taken, so on the on picture taken event, which is an event that happens when we take a picture, just like an on-click event. So on picture taken, this method is going to fire for us automatically. It's going to take the data from the camera and it's going to create a file out of it. So we're going to do a file output stream null, create a file output stream. It's regular old Java file I/O. Try output stream is going to be equal to new file output string. The string format is going to look like this. We're going to give it a number, and then we're going to put JPG on the end of it, and then the system current time in milliseconds. So we're going to put a time on the file, and then we're going to put a name on the file, and we're going to load it in this directory. So if you look at your phone, actually, if your phone crashes, does it crash your app when you ran it on your phone? Hey, you.
Yes.
Did you get the box that showed up, or did it crash before the box?
Yeah, the title showed up,
The box showed up.
and then
Did it see a picture?
No.
So it's not reading your camera, is what it's not doing. Oh, okay. All right, you should see a picture in the box. The box should show a picture. Is hers working?
like this. It's supposed to be like that.
Oh, that's better. That's a good start.
It came up with
Yeah.
a demo, and then I just tapped on this one to start.
So is that running off of, okay, so do you have an SD card set up? Okay, so when you take the picture, the SD stuff's gonna, if you look at the emulator, you'll be able to see in the DDMS all of the things here. The reason why you're getting the checkerboard boxes is because the resolution is not supported. The camera resolution on your computer is much higher than the emulator can present, so it's scrambling the image. It's not compatible. That's not a good sign. Actually, that's a better sign.
And then it's like this.
Yeah, that's what it's doing on my device. That's a better sign because it's the API. It's not the inner workings of the app. If the app shows up and you see the window, this problem is with the device. That means that the API is incompatible. So one of the things I'm going to probably do between now and next week is, April 13th, is fix this. Same thing that was, I actually almost have the other one working. I can't remember what it was at this point, but it's just a little tweak. I probably have to figure out what the problem is. I actually had it working at the break, so I'm thinking it's API related. So we'll see. But long story short, what we're looking at then is each one of the method calls that's being run. So we're looking at file I/O. So what I was going to recommend was if it's going through the motions and showing the picture, it probably has the wrong directory for your SD card. Because this is hard setting the SD card, assuming that you have it in that directory, in that folder, right off the root. You have SD card. If you load up Lynda File Manager, this is what it says on mine actually, and I was able to write the pictures earlier. You'll get a bunch of numbers with a bunch of JPGs written on it, is what you'll end up with if it was actually able to take a picture. But if you weren't able to press the button, it hasn't taken a picture yet. So let's see what we've got now. We've got the output stream write the data. The data is what we're coming in from the camera. So the camera is giving us the byte data. We're going to write the data out, and then we're going to close the file. And then we're going to catch any file exception that exists. And then we're going to write down here that the on-picture taken the on-picture taken method was called. And so we have the JPEG created. And believe it or not, that's all we're doing. We're calling the method from the camera to take the picture. We're taking from the on-picture taken event, passing the data and the camera as the context for the creation of the data, and writing it to a file. That's really all we're doing, actually. We have another thing here for the preview. So the preview, which I believe might be the component that's failing, actually. surface holder, M holder, and then we're going to have the public camera. So we're going to have a placeholder for the holder and the camera component. And then on the preview, which is may not necessarily be supported, we're installing the callback so that we can be notified. What you should be able to see in the preview screen. Yours is moving now.
Yeah, it moves unless I.
Yeah, it's because the graphic buffer is filling up and it's having problems rendering the image.
Yeah, if I click, it just.
Your camera's not compatible. Ah, it did take a picture. Yours is working. Only problem is your camera is too sophisticated for the emulator. If you have what emulator did you run that on, by the way?
It is.
4 point something?
4.2.2.
4.2.2. All right, I'm going to do that on mine. And then in your emulator, did you add an SD card?
And the other one which I ran on was API 3.
API 3?
Yeah, 1.5.
Oh,
This
1.5.
Yeah, this is running on API 3 1.5.
I have that in here. If I'm able to upload it, I can actually install. I don't have a API 3?
API level 3.
Wow. I don't know how far I'm going to be able to get with this because it depends on how long the internet access. Actually, I have internet access right now, so we'll see. I'm going to install that one. While that's running, though, I can install. I can look at the 4 points. 4 point. See, I don't have a 4.2. That's the problem. They said, let me make one then. I'll make a new one, and I'm going to call this one Android 4.2. And then the device. What do you have your device set at? What did you have your device set on?
AM2, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to set mine on Nexus. I think that probably, yeah, this one is probably on ARM, which you got probably, I meant your simulator, your developer simulator. It's okay. I've got this set though on API 4.2 is what I want. 4.2, so it's on API level 17. Let's see, and I'm going to give it to 256 RAM. And I'm going to give it a front camera. That's going to be the webcam 0. So it's going to take my picture from my camera. I only have one camera on this device. And I'm going to set the SD card. You have to have an SD card set in order for it to save on the SD card. So I'm going to go 250. So give it a 256. Override existing AVD of the same name. Let's just do that. Actually, we don't have. I'll just change this one to say camera. The other one was a 4.1. This one's a 4.2 camera. Nope, here it is here. The target is a 4.22. So we're going to take 4.2 camera, run it on that. Don't want that one. Okay, let's see. Launching. Well, as I was mentioning before, a lot of the older emulators don't support it, which is kind of interesting that it worked on a API 3. But anyway, long story short, we have the camera demo, which is basically putting up the preview window, and the preview window has a button next to it underneath it if you're able to see the interface for it. And underneath when you click the button, it's just running the button click event that is basically taking and creating, and it's using the instance of the camera, opening up the camera, and taking a picture using the take picture. And then from the take picture perspective, here we go. This is the file we're on. It is taking the raw data, sending it over to another event that says picture taken, on picture taken, which is the event that happens when you take a picture, and writing the information out to a regular old file. And the file is going to be labeled with a number. The number is going to be the number of the sequence of the camera roll, which is where this has come from, and it's actually a component of and is represented by the system current milliseconds. So we're taking the system's current milliseconds and we're using it as the name of the file we're actually going to use. So it's going to be a bunch of numbers.jpg, long story short. So. And then we have the output stream, and then we're closing the stream, and then we're basically putting an on picture taken wrote the bytes. My emulator out here is not going to have a wrote bytes because I can't write the bytes, which is this is coming from the VirtualBox log that's been running. So I want to make sure I actually close this VirtualBox here. It never gets to the right byte stage because it fails before it gets there. So you're not going to see that out here if you don't have any, but I should see it now. If this emulator actually works, I should see it on this one. If not, I have a 1 point something installed now. That's great. So the preview, which is the second file that works with this, is being created to show the picture. So it installs a surface holder callback so we get notified when the underlying surface is created and destroyed. So we're going, the M holder is going to be the preview. So surface holder is going to be the M holder, and M holder get holder. Nothing more than a holder for the picture that we're going to take. That's going to give us a preview, which is going to be just the format that we're going to see it in, which is going to be the preview like what we see on a. Well, it's actually kind of like the preview that we see on a Mac system. Add the callback to it. Set the type to surface type push buffers. So whatever picture we take is going to be pushed to the preview. After you take the picture, if you're able to see the picture on the screen, it changes, which is what yours did. After you took the picture, the preview updated with the different boxes because it wasn't able to resolve the picture correctly. So camera.set preview display holder, we're going to try that out, and if that's the case, then we're going to update it. And then on the preview frame, we're going to output the stream, and the output stream is going to be to the card. So if the preview is failing, your card is going to fill up with about a dozen or so while it tries the output. So you're going to end up with multiple funny files that appear out there on the output stream. And then on the preview frame, you're going to see a little log file that comes up if it actually works. It means that it wrote that out as well. So it's basically taking and creating the image for you in a file and then loading up the file so you can see the image that was taken from the camera. So on surface destroy, it's going to stop the preview, clean up the garbage of anything that was left it there. And then on surface change, we're going to get the camera parameters and we're going to set the frame to the new picture that was taken. So we're going to set the parameters and then start the preview again. And then we have the draw event, so it's going to draw on the canvas, and in fact it's going to draw the paint color red, so we're going to have a red background. And then on the tag, I'm going to say draw. We never actually got to the draw event, which actually might be the problem because the draw is not working in the previous draw event that we were trying to do. So could possibly tweak that actually. And the draw might be failing actually, which is interesting because it's not going to draw that preview window. Which is why it sits there and then it fails out in the beginning. It draws the preview event on the emulators though, on the built-in ones, which is kind of interesting. So I think when I'm gonna play around with this example before the next class meeting, see if I can tweak it to make it work. I believe it's probably going to be a problem with the draw event. Maybe very similar to the other draw example actually that we saw. So I'll figure that one out. But anyway, that's a really low-tech way of taking a picture, saving it to the SD card. And unfortunately, it's not as stable as in the iPhone area where you just have one camera, and you know what the hardware is going to be, and you can simulate it on the emulator, and you can actually create it, so you know what kind of hardware you're working with. When you're working with hardware, you're taking your chances on Android because you don't know exactly what hardware the consumer is going to have and whether that's going to work. So, Emulator Window is out of view and was recentered. Okay. So where do we have the emulator here? Is it working? It's still out of view. It's not having a good time. So I'm not sure if this is actually going to load or not. So it's a good break because if I turn this video off, it might actually load. So let's take a 5-10 minute break or so. We haven't had one since lunch, I don't think.